It started with one sentence. A sentence that detonated across Hollywood like a bomb under silk sheets. He's AF * king idiot. Those 5 words came not from some disgruntled extra, not from an anonymous source, not from some petty director with an axe to grind. No, they came from Dick Van Dyke, the man who danced with penguins, brought joy to generations, and had never, not once, been known for bitterness. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Until now, at 100 years old, the beloved TV icon, a man whose smile practically invented sunshine, sat down for what was expected to be a soft, reflective look back at his storied career. But the cameras hadn't even been rolling for 10 minutes when the storm broke loose. The name, Rob Reiner, came up, and Dick Van Dyke transformed. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. And then, that line, delivered with venom he hadn't used in a century of interviews. He's AF * king idiot. But why? Why now? Why unleash decades of resentment, right when the Reiner family had just suffered its most horrific tragedy? Because make no mistake, this isn't just some Hollywood feud. This isn't another cranky celebrity moment. This is a multi-generational implosion, a legacy shattered, a murder scene with more questions than answers. And at the center of it all, the very man Dick Van Dyke just dismantled on camera, Rob Reiner, 78 years old, director, activist, comedy royalty, and now, dead, stabbed, alongside his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner. Their lifeless bodies found sprawled inside their $13.5 million Brentwood estate, discovered by their daughter Romy, blood still wet on the tiles. And the one arrested for their murder? Their son, Nick Reiner, 32 years old, troubled, brilliant, volatile, found just feet away, living in the estate's guest house. Calm, almost eerily so. Now imagine this. As crime scene investigators swarmed the property, as news helicopters hovered overhead, as Twitter exploded with grief, confusion, and conspiracy theories, Dick Van Dyke, the last man standing from a golden age of entertainment, chose that exact moment to tell the world what he really thought of Rob Reiner. Not only did he hate him, not only did he distrust him, he claimed he had tried to warn people about Rob for decades. So, you have to ask yourself, what did Dick Van Dyke know that the rest of the world didn't? Because when a 100-year-old legend drops an emotional time bomb like this, while a Hollywood dynasty literally crumbles, there's more than just bitterness in play. There's history, there's betrayal, and maybe there's guilt. The kind of guilt that festers for decades until it can no longer stay buried. Let's go back. Let's rewind the tapes, the ones the Reiners didn't want anyone to see. Let's revisit the interviews, the red carpets, the uncomfortable silences, and the smirks that said more than words ever could. Let's hear the whispers from insiders who've stayed silent until now. Because if there's one thing Dick Van Dyke made clear in that explosive interview, it's this. He doesn't care about protecting reputations anymore. The man is 100. He's outlived nearly everyone, and he's got nothing left to lose. And that, perhaps, is what makes this moment so chilling. He doesn't need to fabricate stories. He doesn't need attention. If anything, he's been too quiet over the years, too diplomatic, too graceful, which is why this outburst means something. It's not just a tantrum. It's a confession. It's a final reckoning with a man he says was never what the public believed. But here's where things really get strange. Because moments after Van Dyke's remarks made headlines, Romy Reiner, the daughter who found the bodies, made a statement to police. A statement that sent chills through investigators. She told them that someone in her family was dangerous, that this person should have been watched more closely, that this person was absolutely capable of violence. And no, she wasn't talking about her brother Nick. She was talking about someone else. Someone manipulative. Someone controlling. Someone who should have been stopped years ago. So who was she talking about? Was it Rob himself? Was it her mother? Or was there another name that police didn't release? Now, combine that with the shocking detail from the Reiners' estate staff, claims that one wing of the house was off limits, even to family. That strange late-night arguments were common. That Rob had started becoming paranoid in his final years, installing extra locks, and asking his son Nick to watch over the cameras. What was he afraid of? And how does this all connect to Dick Van Dyke's eruption? Because here's the wildest part of all. Dick Van Dyke had actually visited that house. Twice. Once in the early 2000s. And once just 2 years ago. And according to a source close to the actor, he left both times in a rage. Refused to shake Rob's hand. Told his driver, quote, "Something's not right in that house. There's something sick happening there." At the time, people dismissed it. They chalked it up to age, to frustration. After all, Dick Van Dyke was an icon of joy. Maybe he just wasn't used to Rob's intensity. But now it feels like a warning we all ignored. And the question becomes, what did Dick see? Because no one, and I mean no one, has ever dared say publicly what Dick Van Dyke just did. Hollywood doesn't work that way. There's too much money, too many reputations, too many secrets buried under Walk of Fame stars. But this story, this one is different. This one has a dead director, a confession from a centenarian icon, a daughter who won't stop talking, and a son in handcuffs who hasn't said a word. Not yet. And if you think this is just another celebrity scandal, you're not ready for what comes next. Because we've only scratched the surface of this twisted Hollywood horror. We haven't even touched the diary found in Nick's room, or the missing footage from the estate's security system, or the email from Rob Reiner to a powerful producer, sent just 12 hours before he was killed. So buckle up, because the house of Reiner is collapsing brick by brick, and Dick Van Dyke just lit the match. But what comes next will make everything you've just heard sound tame. And no one, not even the cops, saw it coming. What happens when a man who smiled through a century finally drops the mask? That's the question we're forced to ask as the footage begins. It's a sunny afternoon in Malibu. The waves are crashing. Seagulls scream above. The crew is setting up outside on a sleek wooden deck overlooking the ocean. And in the center of it all, in a bright blue sweater and crisp khakis, sits Dick Van Dyke. Cheerful, polite, joking with the camera guys. Exactly the way you'd expect him to be. For the first few minutes, it's everything fans could want. He's laughing about Mary Poppins, sharing anecdotes from the Dick Van Dyke Show, making light of turning 100. "I feel like a vintage car," he says, flashing that signature grin. Polished on the outside, rusted to hell under the hood. But then it happens. The moment. The shift. The interviewer, young, respectful, trying to seem casual, brings up a name. "So, you worked with Carl Reiner quite a bit. Did you ever cross paths with his son, Rob?" There's a pause. It's not even long. But something snaps in Dick's expression. His smile disappears like someone flipped a switch. His eyes narrow. He leans forward just a little. And then he says it. "Rob Reiner." "Yeah, I knew Rob. He's AF * king idiot." Boom. That's the quote that went viral. That's the moment TMZ clipped. The moment Twitter exploded. The moment Gen Z, many of whom barely knew who either man was, suddenly sat up and said, "Wait, what the hell did Dick Van Dyke just say?" But what happened next was even more unsettling. Because instead of laughing it off, instead of smoothing over the comment with a classic joke, Dick doubled down. "You want the truth?" he said. "I think he destroyed people. Quietly. And nobody ever called him on it." Now pause for a second. Ask yourself, why would a 100-year-old legend, adored by generations, suddenly go nuclear on another Hollywood icon? Why take that risk? Why now? What was really behind that glare? To understand it, we need to rewind. Not just to this interview, but to the decades of history between these two men. Because believe it or not, they go way back. The early years, two legacies collide. In the 1960s, Dick Van Dyke and Carl Reiner were inseparable. Not just collaborators, friends, creative soulmates. Reiner created the Dick Van Dyke Show. After all, he shaped Dick's career, protected him, believed in his charisma even when others didn't. Rob, back then, was just Carl's kid. A pudgy, awkward teenager tagging along to tapings, watching his dad direct, sitting quietly in the shadows. But according to Dick, even then, Rob was different. "I remember watching him in the corner," Dick told the interviewer. "He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't even clap when his own father crushed a scene. He was always watching, like he was calculating something. Was that an exaggeration? Maybe. But more than one person from those early days has since come forward saying they remember the same thing. One crew member, who asked to remain anonymous, described Rob as brilliant, but arrogant even as a kid. "He acted like we all worked for him," the source said. And this was before he ever touched a camera. When Rob eventually broke into the business, it wasn't just as a lucky Nepo baby. He was talented, no denying it. This is Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally. These weren't flukes. He had vision. But with that vision came an edge, a coldness, a pattern of burning bridges. And Dick Van Dyke? He says he saw that edge coming a mile away. The dinner party that went wrong. Flash forward to 1995. By now, Rob is a powerhouse director. Dick is semi-retired but still beloved. They're invited to a private industry dinner in Beverly Hills, one of those elite tables where jokes are currency and power is passed over wine glasses. According to someone who attended that night, it didn't go well. Dick made a joke about old-school sitcoms, a source said. Totally harmless. And Rob just snapped. He leaned in and said, "Guys like you are why this town still thinks slapstick is clever." It silenced the table. Dick Van Dyke, a man who had danced, quite literally, with cartoon penguins, reportedly just smiled. But later that night, he told a friend, "There's a sickness in him, something his father didn't catch in time." That comment would echo for decades. A hidden feud, and a chilling visit. But it wasn't until 2003 that things really turned dark. That year, Dick was invited to a private screening of one of Rob's political documentaries. The event was at the Reiner's home in Brentwood. Yes, that house. The same estate where Rob and Michelle were murdered years later. And according to Dick, the visit disturbed him. "He took me on a tour," Dick recounted in the interview. "Wanted to show off his wine cellar, his panic room, his collection of God knows what. I felt like I was in a bunker. The place reeked of fear." Now, was that paranoia? Or was Dick sensing something real? Because in that same interview, Dick dropped another bombshell. Rob said something weird that night. He said, "You know, sometimes you gotta cut out the rot to save the tree." I asked him what he meant. He said, "You'll understand someday." That quote hasn't been verified by anyone else. But it matches the tone of what others have hinted at. That Rob had grown increasingly obsessed with control, legacy, and family discipline in his later years. The breaking point, the final straw, according to Dick, came in 2016. Rob had been publicly attacking conservative politicians, a frequent voice on MSNBC, a darling of progressive media. But behind the scenes, Dick claims he was just as ruthless with people he disagreed with inside his own family. He was suffocating them, Dick said, especially the boy. He meant Nick. And that's where Dick's voice cracked, just slightly. "I knew Nick as a kid," he said. "He was sweet, shy, but smart. And by the time I saw him again, it was like the light was gone from his eyes." This is when things get uncomfortable. Because what Dick implies next is that Rob may have been emotionally, or even psychologically, manipulating his son. He wanted to mold him into something, Dick said. But I think he crushed him instead. Now remember, this is before the murders, before the headlines, before Nick's mugshot plastered every screen in America. Dick said all this before the world knew what would unfold just months later. Which raises an unsettling possibility. Was Dick Van Dyke trying to warn us, in his own way? Was this interview a confession? A plea? A last-ditch attempt to stop something he feared was already in motion? Back to the interview. After that string of bombshells, the interviewer, clearly rattled, tried to pivot, tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But Dick wasn't having it. He looked into the lens, voice steady, and said, "If something happens to that family, just know, it didn't come out of nowhere. We all saw it coming. We just chose to look away." That line never made it to the final cut. Producers later claimed it was off-topic and too speculative. But a leaked rough version of the footage contains it, raw, unedited, chilling. And when that clip finally surfaced, it blew the entire narrative wide open. Because this wasn't just gossip. This was a warning. And in light of what happened at the Brentwood estate, the blood, the betrayal, the silence, it suddenly meant everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. How does a man go from Hollywood darling to whispered warnings and bloodstained tragedy? That's the uncomfortable question hanging over the legacy of Rob Reiner. A man who shaped a generation's idea of love and laughter on screen, and yet, according to more than one person close to him, inspired fear, silence, and fury behind closed doors. Because while the public saw the smiling face of Meathead from All in the Family, the heartfelt director behind Stand By Me, the romantic genius who gave us When Harry Met Sally, There was a different Rob. The one Dick Van Dyke called a King idiot. The one who allegedly screamed at his son during rehab visits. The one who, in his final days, told a friend, "I built an empire out of charm. And now it's choking me." Let's rewind. Because to understand how it all unraveled, we have to understand how it all began. The golden child of comedy royalty. Rob Reiner didn't grow up, he arrived. Born to Carl Reiner, a comedic titan, and Estelle Reiner, a singer and actress, Rob was raised in a house where punchlines were currency and dinner tables felt like writers' rooms. Guests included Mel Brooks, Sid Caesar, and Dick Van Dyke himself. To the outside world, it was a dream. But insiders say it was more like a laboratory of pressure. "You didn't laugh unless it was earned," said one family friend. "You didn't speak unless it was witty." Even the kids were expected to perform. Rob, struggling to stand out in his father's shadow, developed what one classmate called a defensive arrogance. He wasn't mean, at first, just sharp, controlled, calculated, a perfectionist. And by the time he landed the role of Michael "Meathead" Stivic on All in the Family in 1971, that perfectionism had evolved into something else. Control, obsession, a hunger to win. And when All in the Family exploded, so did Rob's ego. "He was brilliant," said a fellow cast member. "But he made it clear. If you weren't on his level intellectually, you didn't matter." The director who made the world fall in love. Now here's the contradiction. Because for all the darkness swirling behind the scenes, on screen, Rob was a master of the human condition. His films felt warm, honest, emotional. Stand By Me, a coming-of-age masterpiece. The Princess Bride, whimsical perfection. A Few Good Men, tight, suspenseful, unforgettable. He wasn't just talented, he was versatile. He could make you laugh, cry, and question the U.S. military, all before lunch. Critics called him the Spielberg of sincerity. Studios called him bankable gold. And fans, they adored him. But here's the twist. As his movies got more hopeful, his personal relationships grew colder. The whispers on set. Behind the camera, Reiner was a force. He ran tight ships, demanded excellence, demanded obedience. Multiple crew members across his films, from the 80s through the 2010s, have spoken, often anonymously, about the tension on set. "You were either in Rob's inner circle," one lighting technician said, "or you were disposable." Another said, "He didn't scream. Not like some directors. It was worse. He'd humiliate you with silence, with eye rolls, with a public compliment that was secretly a takedown." Example, during the filming of Misery, a young assistant brought Rob the wrong version of a storyboard. In front of the crew, Rob allegedly said, "Thank you for reminding me why internships shouldn't be paid." It got a laugh, but the assistant never came back. It was these kinds of passive-aggressive power plays that built Rob's reputation as difficult, a reputation hidden beneath layers of liberal activism and Hollywood respect. Because Rob didn't just make movies. He made alliances. The political power player. In the 2000s, Reiner transformed again, this time into a liberal warrior. He became a major donor to Democratic causes, regularly appeared on CNN and MSNBC, founded activist groups, battled California's Prop 8, railed against the Bush administration. To the public, he was a hero, an older white Hollywood man using his wealth and voice for progress. But to some in his orbit, this shift felt strategic. He needed a cause, said a former publicist, because he was starting to lose creative traction. He wasn't getting the scripts he wanted. The industry was changing. So he reinvented himself as a political heavyweight. And with that reinvention came even more control. He allegedly pushed friends out of his life for voting the wrong way, berated a family friend for inviting a conservative to a dinner party, cut off funding to a nephew's film project after learning the script included anti-woke satire. It was his way or exile. Even his own family wasn't immune. The family man, with no room for chaos. From the outside, Rob and Michelle looked like the perfect pair, married for decades, 2 successful careers, a tight-knit family. But cracks were forming, and deep ones. Those close to the Reiners claim Rob had become increasingly critical of his children, especially Nick. He couldn't understand Nick's pain, said someone close to the family. He saw addiction as weakness, depression as laziness. He wanted Nick to man up. Nick, struggling with substance abuse, checked in and out of rehab throughout his 20s. At first, Rob supported him financially, but emotionally, not so much. He'd call him a loser, one friend recalled, to his face, at family dinners. And yet, despite that, Nick never cut ties. He stayed in the guest house, stayed near the father he never seemed to please. Why? Some say he was financially trapped. Others believe he was emotionally shackled, still hoping for approval. But one therapist who allegedly worked with Nick described the dynamic as classic narcissistic control. Nick lived in Rob's shadow, and Rob liked it that way. It was the only way he felt safe. The journal entries that surfaced after the murder. After the murder, police found a journal in Nick Reiner's room. Most entries were vague, erratic, stream of consciousness. But one, dated just weeks before the murders, stood out. It read, "He told me I'm nothing without his name. That I should be grateful to live under his roof. That I'm a broken reflection of what he built. But if I'm nothing, why does he keep me so close?" That chilling entry was just the beginning. Investigators also found pages referencing arguments, sleepless nights, and even one bizarre note. The house has rooms even he doesn't go into anymore. What did that mean? Was it metaphor? Was it real? Either way, it fed the growing theory that something rotten festered inside the Reiner home. And that Rob, for all his brilliance and progressivism, had become the tyrant of his own kingdom, the nightmare behind the public smile. After his death, fans mourned. Celebrities posted tributes. Old clips from All in the Family and The Princess Bride resurfaced. But beneath that nostalgia, something else began to simmer. A picture of a man who had become unrecognizable to those who once adored him. Not evil, not a monster, but a man consumed by legacy, by image, by a desperate need to be remembered well. And maybe, just maybe, that need destroyed the very people he was trying to impress. His wife, his son, his daughter. And if you believe Dick Van Dyke, Rob Reiner himself was the fuse that lit the powder keg. Because what comes next isn't just about ego. It's about what happens when a man builds a prison out of fame and locks his family inside it. And the first to hear the screaming was Romy Reiner. But what she saw would unravel everything. What do you see when you pull up to a $13.5 million mansion in Brentwood? For most, it's the dream. Sprawling green lawns, towering palms, high hedges shielding it from the world. A symbol of old money privacy tucked away in one of Los Angeles' most exclusive neighborhoods. But to Romy Reiner, the 27-year-old daughter who stumbled upon her parents' lifeless bodies, it wasn't just a house. It was a prison, a labyrinth, a ticking time bomb that had been counting down for years. Because inside that estate, behind the custom iron gates and perfectly staged interiors, something sinister had been building. And those who visited often left feeling off, like something was hiding in the walls. And some claimed it literally was. A house too big for comfort. The Reiner estate was massive, over 12,000 square feet, 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a home theater, library, wine cellar, pool, tennis court, a detached guest house where Nick Reiner lived. But it wasn't the size that disturbed people. It was the silence. You'd expect a house that size to be full of laughter, music, something, said one former housekeeper. But there was none, just cold, echoing silence. Like even the walls were afraid to make noise. Another staff member described the lighting as dim, deliberately so. They had all these blackout curtains, always drawn. It felt like a bunker, not a home. According to contractors who worked on renovations over the years, Rob Reiner had become increasingly obsessed with privacy and isolation. He had us install a second security system, not just cameras, but reinforced locks on the interior rooms, one contractor revealed. We built a hidden panic room behind a bookshelf. Soundproofed, reinforced steel. But here's the twist. Michelle Reiner hated it. She wanted sunlight, music, guests, the contractor said. But Rob kept building walls. The room no one could enter. In interviews after the murders, Romy told police something chilling. There was one room we weren't allowed in, she reportedly said, even when Dad wasn't home. The room, according to floor plans leaked by a real estate agent, wasn't even listed as a bedroom. It was described simply as storage east wing. But Romy called it the dark room. She claims her father installed biometric locks, that he'd disappear into it for hours. sometimes days. Once, when I was 19, she said, I tried to get in. I just wanted a phone charger. The door was unlocked. What she says she saw? Books. Hundreds of them. Stacks everywhere. Surveillance monitors. Not just of the house, but allegedly of his kids. He had a camera on the guest house. One in the garage. Even one in the tree house we had as kids. She says when her father found out she'd entered the room, he didn't yell. He just stood there, quiet, cold, and said, that part of the house isn't yours. Never has been. Never will be. She never went back in. Nick's world, the guest house trap. Let's talk about the guest house. By all accounts, it was a beautiful structure. 2 stories, modern kitchen, full bath, private entrance. Technically, Nick had independence. But those close to him say it was anything but freedom. It was more like a watchtower, said one friend. He wasn't living there by choice. He was placed there, out of the way, but still within view. In fact, a former neighbor claims Nick once told him, it's like being a ghost in your own family. I'm here, but no one really sees me. Worse, the guest house had mirrored windows, which from the outside reflected sunlight, but from the inside, gave a direct line of sight to the main house's eastern wing. Specifically, to the darkroom. Coincidence? Some don't think so. Signs of obsession. There's a pattern here. One that paints Rob Reiner as more than just a control freak. More than a protective father. More than a Hollywood power player. Multiple staffers, neighbors, and even former friends described the same thing. A man who was slowly withdrawing from reality. He had a map of the property framed in his office, one landscaper said, with little markers, like military strategy points. He'd make notes, move markers, mark zones. He was obsessed with vulnerability points, the landscaper said. The word exposure was everywhere. This was a man who made a career out of exposing truths through film, but in his private life, he was building a fortress. And fortresses aren't built for comfort. They're built for sieges. Strange occurrences before the murder. In the 6 months leading up to the murders, several strange things reportedly happened at the estate. Delivery drivers claimed they were told to drop packages at the gate and not ring the bell. A neighbor's dog, which used to run through the Reiner yard, was found injured, caught in wire that hadn't been there before. Michelle, according to a friend, confided that she no longer felt like the house was hers. Romy once claimed she heard a voice screaming, but not human, from the East Wing at 2 a.m. And perhaps most disturbingly, Nick Reiner stopped leaving the guest house. Completely. For 3 weeks. Groceries were delivered. Trash was removed by housekeepers. But he didn't go outside. Not once. And then, suddenly, he did. And within days, his parents were dead. The layout that raises questions. The police report noted something odd about the crime scene. There was no sign of forced entry. No shattered glass. No pried doors. No alarms triggered. Which leads to a disturbing possibility. Did Nick have access to the main house, even after years of being confined to the guest house? And if so, why didn't anyone stop him? But here's where things take a darker turn. Because according to a leaked preliminary autopsy report, Rob and Michelle were not killed in the same room. Michelle was found in the library, slumped against a bookcase, defensive wounds on her arms. Rob was found in the darkroom, alone, face down on the floor, surrounded by his own journals, blood on his hands, a look of, and this was the word used in the coroner's notes, bewilderment. The police photos they won't release. When Romy called 911, she allegedly told dispatch something strange. I think it was someone we know, someone Dad was afraid of, but he never said who. She didn't name Nick directly, at least not at first. She described the scene as surgical, targeted, not random. But here's what's truly haunting. One police source, speaking under condition of anonymity, described the photos of the darkroom. There were photos, he said, printed ones, laid out in a grid, faces scratched out. Some of the family, some we didn't recognize. And in the center of the room, a tablet, still playing security footage. On a loop, the footage showed the library, where Michelle had died. Was Rob watching? Was he watching her die? Or was someone else watching him? What was the Reiner house really hiding? It's easy to romanticize celebrity homes, to assume marble floors and manicured gardens mean peace. But Brentwood isn't just luxury. It's a facade, a place where image is everything. And secrets are easier to bury when the hedges are 12 feet high. The Reiner estate, once the pride of Rob's legacy, now feels like a crime scene of the soul. Every room tells a different story. The kitchen where family meals turned cold. The theater where no one watched films together anymore. The guest house where a son waited, twisted in silence. The dark room, a sanctuary turned tomb. And at the center of it all, a man who tried to build a palace of control, only to be destroyed by the very thing he couldn't control, his own blood. But if Rob was the fortress builder, and Nick was the prisoner, then what role did Romy play? Because she didn't just find the bodies. She found something else that day. Something hidden, something dangerous, and something she refused to hand over to the police. What turns a son into a suspect? That's the question swirling like smoke around Nick Reiner. Once the golden boy of a Hollywood dynasty, now the accused killer of both his parents. A name once quietly whispered in industry circles as brilliant but troubled, now splashed across headlines as Hollywood's darkest secret. But the truth? It didn't start with blood. It started with expectations, with pressure, with a childhood buried under legacy, ego, and the unbearable weight of being a Reiner. Because Nick Reiner wasn't just anyone's son. He was the heir to two empires, the legacy of Carl Reiner, comedic godfather, and Rob Reiner, cultural kingmaker. But what no one asked was, did Nick ever want any of it? Born into a cage. From the moment he was born, Nick was in the spotlight, whether he liked it or not. Photos of baby Nick in Rob's arms at film premieres. Family Christmas cards distributed through agents. A nursery designed by a famous production designer. Nothing about his childhood was normal, not even his crib. It was like being raised on set, a former nanny revealed. Cameras, schedules, expectations. Rob wanted his son to be extraordinary from day one. By age 6, Nick was already in acting classes. By 9, he was writing scripts for short films he was forced to perform for guests. They weren't fun, said a family friend. They were dark, morbid. But Rob would just laugh and say, "That's my boy." Behind the laughter, there was something else, something colder. Because even as a child, Nick began exhibiting signs of emotional distress. And no one, not his teachers, not his family, not even his therapist, seemed willing to address it seriously. Why? Because in a family like the Reiners, image came first. The first breakdown. Nick was 13 the first time he was hospitalized for a mental health crisis. A nervous collapse, the tabloids called it. What actually happened? He locked himself in his bedroom for 36 hours. Didn't eat, didn't sleep, covered the windows with blackout cloth, left cryptic notes under the door. One of them read, "They keep telling me I'm lucky, but I feel like I'm drowning in someone else's dream." After that, he was sent to a high-end treatment center in Arizona. Rob visited once. Michelle visited twice. Dick Van Dyke, strangely enough, visited 3 times. They connected, a nurse at the center recalled. Dick just sat with him, didn't push. He was the only one who didn't try to fix him. But when Nick returned home, nothing had changed. The invisible son, Nick once told a close friend. They built a career on storytelling, but they never let me tell my own. And that was the theme of his adolescence. Invisible. He stopped attending industry events. Wasn't included in family photo spreads. Became the other Reiner. But behind the scenes, he was watching, reading, writing, obsessively. By the time he was 19, he'd written over 40 scripts, none produced. By 21, he had a brief stint as a script consultant. By 23, he checked into rehab again, this time for a heroin addiction. And still silence. No press statements. No interviews. Just whispered rumors of another Reiner tragedy being buried beneath a pile of NDAs. But inside the Reiner estate, the pressure was boiling. The night he called 911. This part of the story was almost lost, buried beneath the more recent, horrific headlines. But 3 years before the murders, Nick Reiner made a 911 call that stunned even the dispatcher. Here's what he reportedly said. "I think my parents are going to kill each other, and I think they want me to watch." The call was brief, disjointed, possibly drug-influenced. Police arrived. No arrests were made. Rob later claimed it was a misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by addiction. But Romy told a different story to a family friend. That night was bad. Dad smashed a chair. Mom locked herself in the bathroom. Nick was screaming, but it wasn't rage, it was fear. After that night, Nick disappeared for 6 months. He wasn't seen publicly. His phone was disconnected. Some speculated he'd gone back to rehab. But the truth? He was living in the guest house, just feet from the main estate. Totally isolated. Monitored. Controlled. The failed Netflix deal. In 2022, Nick Reiner was reportedly in talks with Netflix to develop a limited series based on his own life. Working title: The Boy in the Guest House. According to insiders, it was raw, brutal, and deeply personal. The story of a Hollywood son whose father saw him as a liability, a mother who turned a blind eye, a sister who tried to help and got shut out. But before the deal could move forward, something happened. Rob intervened. He was furious, said one producer. Told Netflix that if they touched it, he'd pull all future collaborations. The project was killed in days. And Nick? He spiraled. Back to drinking. Back to paranoia. Back to writing darker and darker things in his private journals. The journal entries before the murders. In one entry, dated just 2 weeks before the murders, Nick wrote, "They say blood is thicker than water. But in this house, blood is just something you mop off the floor." Another, "I keep waiting for someone to see me. Not the version of me in their head, just me. But maybe that person doesn't exist anymore." And finally, the most haunting one, "If they die, will I finally be free? Or will I just be the last ghost in this house?" Genius? Addict? Both. So who is Nick Reiner? A victim of intergenerational trauma? A brilliant mind twisted by pressure and silence? Or a violent, calculating killer who turned on the very people who gave him everything? Or, and this is the hard part, is he all of it? Because genius and madness often live side by side. Because addiction doesn't cancel out brilliance. And pain doesn't always excuse bloodshed. But here's the strangest part. Even after his arrest, Nick has refused to speak. No public statements. No press releases. No tearful courtroom confessions. Just silence. As if he's letting the world write his story one more time. But there's one person who claims to have heard him speak in the hours after the murders. One person who saw something none of us were supposed to see. Romy. And the photo she took, the one police allegedly tried to make her delete, might just unravel everything we think we know. How does a family dinner end in blood? That's the question every detective, neighbor, and fan has been asking since the brutal murder of Rob and Michelle Reiner. A couple whose lives were wrapped in Hollywood glitz, now unwrapped with horrifying violence. The official statement was sterile. Robert Reiner, 78, and Michelle Singer Reiner, 70, were found deceased at their Brentwood home. Their son, Nicholas Reiner, 32, has been taken into custody and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. But behind that short paragraph, a night so chilling, so chaotic, and so eerily methodical that even seasoned investigators whispered one phrase. It felt rehearsed. This wasn't a random outburst. It wasn't spontaneous violence. It was a crescendo. The final, brutal note of a song that had been playing silently in the Reiner home for years. And it all began with a text. 5:07 p.m., the invite. According to Romy's statement to police, the evening was supposed to be low-key. A family dinner. Just the 4 of them. Rob, Michelle, Nick, Romy. Romy said she got a text from her mother at 5:07 p.m. "Dad wants you here at 7. Nick's cooking. Be brave." XO. The double question marks. The "be brave." It already smelled off. Later, Romy told investigators, "Mom never joked about Nick cooking. She never said be brave about anything. I think she was scared." But still, Romy showed up. She had no idea what she was walking into. 6:30 p.m. Strangeness in the guest house. Surveillance footage from a nearby home, not the Reiner estate, which had mysteriously lost power that night, showed a flicker of movement near the guest house door around 6:30 p.m. Nick steps out. He's wearing black, head to toe, no shoes. He walks to the main house, carrying a small box. Police haven't confirmed what was inside, but rumors suggest it contained family letters, old photographs. Some believe it may have held a weapon. Then, Nick disappears into the house. He won't be seen alive again on any external camera. 7 p.m., dinner starts. Unevenly, Romy arrives. She parks by the side gate, texts Michelle, "Here." No answer. She walks around back and enters through the kitchen. She describes the lights as dim, like the power had only partially returned. Inside, she finds Nick at the stove, stirring something in a pot. Calm, Focused. Too calm. She says. He didn't look at me. Just said, "Glad you came. It's almost time." That phrase, almost time. Almost time for what? Romy claims she felt an immediate sense of wrongness. The house was too quiet. Her father wasn't in the living room, where he usually paced. Her mother wasn't setting the table. She asked Nick where they were. He replied, "She's in the library. He's in his room. It's better this way. It's more poetic." 7:12 p.m. The scream. It was one scream. One sharp, short cry. Romy ran down the hall toward the library, but Nick blocked her. He stood in the hallway, arms wide, smiling faintly. "Let them finish," he whispered. "They were always at war. I just called for a ceasefire." Romy shoved past him and burst into the library. She found her mother collapsed against the bookshelves, bleeding, gasping, trying to speak. But couldn't. Michelle's final moments. A single tear running down her cheek. She looked directly at Romy, and then she stopped breathing. Romy screamed again. Nick didn't move. 7:17 p.m. The second body. According to the police report, Romy then fled the library, dialing 911. But before she could make it outside, she turned toward the east wing, toward the infamous dark room. Why? Because the door was open, wider than it had ever been. Light spilling out. A sound. Soft, static, whispering like a broken speaker, drifting from inside. She stepped closer. Inside, she saw Rob Reiner's body, face down. Blood pooling under his chest. Beside him, torn journal pages. Surveillance monitors still glowing. A tablet, glitching. And the smell, she later told police, was metallic and sickening. Like the air didn't want to be breathed. She backed away. And then she took a photo. Not of her father. Of the monitors. Because on those monitors, allegedly, were still frames. Paused footage. Of Michelle. In the library. Facing the camera. Eyes wide. As if she'd seen someone she didn't expect to see. 7:20 p.m. The 911 call. Romy finally escaped the house and made the call that would launch a national media storm. Her words to the dispatcher were fractured. "My parents are. I think they're dead. I don't know. My brother. Nick, he's not okay. He was too calm. He planned something. I don't think he was alone. Wait. Back up. Not alone." That part of her call stunned investigators. Because every official report, every media narrative, points to Nick Reiner as acting alone. But Romy never wavered. She insisted Nick was being influenced, that there were voices involved, that someone had been feeding him ideas. And she claimed her father knew it was coming. The tablet with the last message. Police found a tablet next to Rob's body. On it, an open file. A note. Unsent. Typed but not emailed. The message was short. Just 7 lines. "If this happens, blame me. I let it fester. I protected the wrong one. I made the silence. I taught them not to scream. I watched the seeds rot and called it order. This was always going to end in blood. I just hoped I'd be the only one to bleed." Was this a suicide note? A confession? A last-minute attempt at redemption? We still don't know. But it adds yet another question. Was Rob Reiner trying to stop his own son, or was he resigned to the fallout? The aftermath. Nick was found calmly sitting on the guest house couch. Hands clean. Clothes changed. Hair wet. He'd showered. He didn't resist arrest. Didn't ask for a lawyer. When asked where his parents were, he reportedly said, "Back where they started." And when asked why he did it, he smiled and said, "They'll understand someday." Unanswered questions. The evidence is damning. But it's not complete. Why did the house's main security system fail that night? Why was the panic room untouched? Why did Michelle send a cryptic text hours before her death? And most of all, who, if anyone, was influencing Nick? Because Romy insists her brother was not alone in his mind. She described it like this. It was like he had someone whispering in his ear. Someone we couldn't see. Was it delusion? Paranoia? Or had Nick been manipulated by someone else? We may never know the full truth. But what we do know is this. That night didn't just take 2 lives. It shattered a legacy. It exposed a family's darkest secrets. And it left behind one witness, holding the only photo that might explain everything. And Romy? She still hasn't released it. Because she claims what's in that image could burn down more than just a family. What if the quietest voice held the loudest truth? That's the question circling around Romy Reiner, the only living member of the Reiner household, and the one person who witnessed everything unfold from within. Not just the crime, but the family's collapse, the decades of silence, and the dark rituals of control that defined life inside the Brentwood mansion. And until now, she's been invisible. Not to the cameras, necessarily. She's been in photos, on social media, a few interviews here and there. But to the narrative, totally erased. Because in a household consumed by the tension between Rob and Nick, Romy was something else entirely. The bystander. The chronicler. And maybe, just maybe, the only one who truly understood what the Reiner name was hiding. The shadow of her last name. Romy was born in 1997, the second child of Rob and Michelle Reiner. And from the beginning, the comparison was obvious. Nick was the artist, the firecracker, the golden son. Romy was the afterthought, smart, polite, quiet. Rob reportedly once told a producer on set, "Romy's great. Low maintenance. Like her mother." At first glance, that sounds sweet. But to those close to the family, it revealed something deeper. Romy didn't cause problems, so she was ignored. She was the glue, a longtime family assistant said. She ran interference between Nick and Rob, between her mom and the staff, even between guests. Always smoothing things over, always quiet, always diplomatic. Never loud enough to be feared, never chaotic enough to be noticed. But that invisibility gave her an advantage. She saw everything. The invisible archivist. Friends say Romy had one strange habit. She recorded things. Not publicly, not for clout. Privately, on a cracked iPhone 8 that she kept charged but never updated. She would record conversations, fights, even monologues whispered through the walls. "She told me once that no one would believe her if she didn't keep evidence," said one former classmate. "At the time, I thought she was paranoid. Now, I'm not so sure." After the murder, police found over 150 audio files saved on that phone. One was labeled, "Dad loses it. Nick locked out again." Another, "Mom cries in guest bath, July." But there was one file, one that has not been made public, simply titled, "The Deal." What was the deal? What was so important, so secretive, that Romy chose to archive it in plain text? Only she knows. And so far, she's refused to hand it over. The girl who saw it coming. In the days leading up to the murders, Romy had been trying to get out. She'd applied for graduate school. Across the country, she'd spoken to a realtor about apartments in New York. She'd even packed boxes, quietly, in the night, while her parents slept. But every time she tried to move forward, something pulled her back. Nick was unraveling, she told investigators. He was talking to himself, writing notes on mirrors, sleeping with a knife under his pillow. She brought it up to her father. According to Romy, Rob simply replied, "He's always been dramatic. He'll grow out of it." But Romy didn't agree. She told her mother, "Something's coming. I can feel it." And Michelle, always the peacekeeper, always the fixer, just hugged her daughter and said, "Then let's try to keep everyone calm until it passes." It never passed. The moment she took the photo. You remember this part from chapter 5. Romy, stumbling into the dark room, seeing her father's body. But what we didn't fully explore, the moment she snapped a photo. Now, you might ask, why would someone do that? Why would a daughter, trembling and in shock, take out her phone and take a picture? Because Romy had been preparing for this for years. She had watched too many things disappear. Too many truths rewritten by her father's press team. Too many incidents covered up. So when she saw the monitors, saw the footage still playing, she acted on instinct. She took the photo. And according to a source close to the case, that image contains something disturbing. Not gore, not blood, but a reflection. A human figure, not Rob, not Michelle, not Nick, standing in the background of the paused footage. Their face blurred, their body barely visible. But they're there. And Romy has refused to explain who it is. Her police interviews, and the things she left out. Romy gave 2 interviews to police. In the first, she was calm, composed, clinical. She described the events with astonishing clarity. But in the second interview, something changed. She became more guarded. Less willing to share specifics. When asked directly about the photo, she said, "It's not time yet." When asked if she believed Nick acted alone, she replied, "That depends on your definition of alone." And when they asked if she felt safe, she paused, then whispered, "Not really. What is she hiding?" This is where theories explode. Some believe Romy knows who manipulated Nick, possibly a family therapist, a mentor, or even an unknown sibling. Others believe she herself may have been involved, a long-suffering daughter pushed too far. But most agree on this. Romy knows more than she's saying. And if the rumors about the image are true, the image that allegedly shows a shadowy figure in the murder footage, then the story isn't over. Because if Nick wasn't acting alone, then who else was in that house? The strange man at the funeral. A week after the murder, the family held a private memorial service. Few attended. Paparazzi were kept far away. But according to two guests, a man appeared near the back. Late 30s. Tall. Dressed in black. Not family. Not press. Not staff. He never signed the guest book. He never approached anyone. He just watched Romy from a distance. One guest asked who he was. Romy allegedly turned pale and said, "That's not possible. He's dead." And then, the man vanished. Some believe this is a delusion, grief, confusion. Others say it connects directly to Romy's private journals, where she writes about a lost brother. No birth certificate, no official record, just whispers. The lost brother theory. There is a theory, so far unconfirmed, that Rob and Michelle had a third child, a stillborn, or adopted, or secret. According to some, Romy wrote poems in college referencing 3 children /born of silence /1 erased before the ink dried. In one journal entry, she wrote, "I remember hearing him cry, but no one ever said his name." Is this fantasy? A metaphor? Or is there something far more haunting beneath the Reiner family history? If Romy's silence is protection, what exactly is she protecting us from? The evidence in her hands. So far, Romy has refused to release the photo publicly, to hand over certain journal pages, to reveal the full contents of the audio file titled "The Deal." Why? She says she's waiting for the right moment. Some call that selfish. Others call it strategy. But the truth is, Romy is the only person left alive who has seen every side of this family. The public Rob, the violent Nick, the grieving Michelle, and whoever, or whatever, that image on the monitor might be. And here's the real kicker. Romy recently hired a lawyer. Not for defense, not for privacy, for a production deal. She's shopping the story. Netflix, Hulu, Apple, even HBO. The working title? Inheritance. What's coming next? We don't know when Romy will release the photo. We don't know what the deal audio file contains. We don't know who that figure in the footage was. But one thing is certain. Romy isn't done talking. She's just getting started. And the next time she speaks, it might not be to the police. It might not be to the press. It might be on a screen near you. And when that happens, everything we thought we knew about the Reiner murders could shatter. What would drive a man to murder the only 2 people who raised him? In Nick Reiner's case, it may not have been rage. It may not have been hatred. It might have been something more chilling. Obedience. Because when detectives raided the guest house where Nick had lived in the shadow of his parents' mansion for years, they didn't just find a crime scene. They found a diary. A black leather-bound journal. Worn at the edges. Pages curled like they'd been thumbed through hundreds of times. But this wasn't a diary filled with doodles or rants. It read like a manifesto. A story. A countdown. And right in the center of it all was something called the deal. A pact. Between whom? That's where the story takes a disturbing turn. The discovery of the diary. During the search of the guest house after the murders, officers found Nick's room eerily clean. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No discarded clothes or weapons. But there, resting neatly on the center of his desk, was the journal. Its cover was marked only with a single date. October 10th, 10. Why that date? Police still don't know. But according to a forensic linguist who reviewed the writing, that entry marked a psychological shift. It's when the voice changes, the expert said. From reflective to resolved. From victimized to vengeful. From that date forward, Nick's entries became darker, more structured, like he was preparing a script. Selected excerpts, revealed but not released. Though the full journal has been sealed as evidence, several excerpts have been leaked through anonymous insiders close to the investigation. Let's break them down. Entry. October 10th, 2010. He told me I don't know pain. He told me I don't know legacy. He told me I should be grateful. So I asked him, what should I do with this gratitude? He said, turn it into something useful. That's when I knew I was going to burn it all down. Entry. December 12th, 2012, titled Inheritance. She said I wasn't planned, that I was her way of giving him something to hold on to. But he never held on. He just observed. Me, her, Romy, the world. He doesn't love. He curates. Entry, April 9th, 2017, the first time the deal is mentioned. She came to me in the darkroom, told me we were both prisoners, said he'd built the house to keep us. Then she said, there's a way out, but you have to take the first step. I thought it was a dream, but when I woke up, the closet door was open. And inside, the first page of the deal. Who is she? Investigators originally assumed she referred to Michelle Reiner. But Romy, in a rare private comment, allegedly told a detective he wasn't writing about Mom. He was writing about someone else, someone he claimed lived in the walls. This revelation launched a new wave of speculation. Was Nick hallucinating? Was he experiencing paranoid delusions? Or, as some dark theories suggest, was someone actually guiding him? Because if we take his writings literally, then Nick believed the deal wasn't just a fantasy. It was a contract, with terms, with consequences, with a deadline. The terms of the deal, according to the diary. 3 core rules appear throughout Nick's writings. 1 must be sacrificed so 2 can be free. The house must be sealed before the blood flows. The ghost must be acknowledged, or it will choose for you. Some say these were metaphorical. Others, especially those who believe in the third Reiner child theory, think they were deadly literal. Because if you interpret these lines as instructions, they eerily match the sequence of events from the night of the murders. Rob and Michelle killed in separate rooms, one sacrificed first. The estate's security systems mysteriously offline, a form of sealing the house. And Romy, the only one who's acknowledged the ghost in her interviews. Is this just coincidence? Or was Nick following a script he believed had supernatural power? The deal, audio file on Romy's phone. Now, remember Chapter 6? Romy's infamous audio archive. One file remains unreleased. The deal. According to someone who claims to have heard it, the recording is not of Nick. It's of Rob. A whispered monologue, possibly recorded through a vent or wall. Here's what the source says Rob says on the tape. They think I don't see it, but it's there, watching him. I thought I could contain it, but it's feeding on him now. And if it breaks him, it's going to break everything. Who, or what, was Rob referring to? Was it Nick's mental illness? A metaphor for trauma? Or something far more sinister? A note hidden in Michelle's book. After the murders, investigators searched Michelle Reiner's personal library. Tucked inside a worn copy of Wuthering Heights was a note in her handwriting. It read, "If he does what I think he's going to do, don't just blame him. Blame the silence. Blame the power that kept the truth buried. And above all, blame me for not leaving." It was signed simply, M. This note was never made public. Until now. Was this a confession? Or a curse? When pieced together, the diary, the audio, and the hidden note paint a picture that's hard to ignore. Something was building. A pressure. A plan. A promise. Nick believed he was bound to it. Michelle feared it. Rob tried to control it. Romy tried to document it. And when the pressure finally snapped, the deal was fulfilled. The ending pages of Nick's diary. The final entry, written in frantic, looping script, is dated the morning of the murders. It's tonight. The storm is here. I've turned the lock. The blood will speak. And in the silence, I'll finally hear the truth. If this doesn't work, then nothing ever did. No one knows what that last line means. But one thing is clear. Nick Reiner believed what he was doing wasn't murder. He believed it was release. Where is the diary now? The LAPD has sealed it as evidence. But leaks continue. More pages are expected to emerge during the trial. And if even half of what's inside is real, then this isn't just a true crime story. It's a psychological horror buried in privilege, perfection, and pain. Because the deal wasn't just Nick's journal. It was the last will and testament of a broken family. And as Romy prepares to go public, with her photo, her audio files, and her story, there's only one question left. Will the truth set her free, or destroy her too? Can a ghost haunt a family without ever leaving a footprint? In the unraveling tragedy of the Reiner family, there's a name that keeps returning like an echo. Never accused, never present, but always there. Carl Reiner, the father, the originator, the one whose laugh built a generation of joy, and whose silence may have built a legacy of rot. He passed away in 2020, surrounded by love, tributes, and reverence. To the world, he was the embodiment of comedic genius, the warm heart of old-school Hollywood. The man who created The Dick Van Dyke Show, wrote with Mel Brooks, and symbolized everything good about entertainment. But to those within the Reiner family, he was something else entirely. Not a monster, not a villain, but a myth. And myths can be more dangerous than men. The weight of a name. Before Nick Reiner was born, before Rob made When Harry Met Sally, before Romy kept whispered recordings hidden in cracked iPhones, there was Carl. Towering, commanding, and most importantly, unquestioned. He didn't yell, said a former family friend. He didn't have to. You wanted to impress Carl. You needed him to smile at you. And when he didn't, it felt like dying. Rob, from the moment he could talk, was molded in his father's image. The same dry wit, the same command of a room, but also the same inability to handle chaos. And according to those close to both men, it was Carl's silence about dysfunction that set the tone for the next 2 generations. He believed in containment, one biographer said. Everything inside the family stayed inside. He didn't believe in therapy, didn't believe in mess. The final conversation, what Dick Van Dyke heard.